Earthlings, Earthlings of the Earth, how are you doing? Welcome back to yet another vegan time tunnel. Actually, I had a quick look at the playlist today, and it seems like we've got about 66 different time tunnel interviews, although some of those are adverts for the actual series. But so we're doing pretty well. So if you're new to this, this is an archive of significant events in the movement, and we're building up week on week in order to do that. A little bit of kind of housekeeping, if you like. If you're on anything other than my YouTube channel, I will be able to see your comments. But if you want to be more involved with the general chat that goes on, then my YouTube channel is the best for that. And then in terms of comments, we don't charge for anybody to have their comments put on the screen, as some people do. So we don't do that. And so feel free to comment. And if you have any questions as we proceed, I'll give them to the guests. So yes, it's another guest one. In fact, this is part 3 of Mark Humanity's session on his epic story about direct action in Ireland. In fact, this is all connected to a book, which is available pretty soon. So we're going to be advertising that quite a bit today. It's got a very pithy title. It says, The Humanity Trigger on the Origins of Anti-Speciesism by Means of Direct Action, a History of Radical Action for Animals in Ireland, 1822 to 2022. So a long time span and very, very short title, as you can see. So without further ado, let's go. Whoa. Hi, Mark. I tried to get rid of you early there. Sorry about that. So,
I don't know, Roger.
Yeah. So how's your rainforest?
It's beautiful. It's summertime almost here, and it's great.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, a friend of yours is in the chat, Bernie Wright, Mark. So that's quite good. We've got Philip from New York, and Linda. Hello, Linda, and Deb is in the house as well. So welcome as we all kind of pile in. I was going to ask you actually, Mark, about the title of the book. Is there a kind of, well, was there a trigger for it? Should I say that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I wanted to like avoid a really obvious title for the book. There's been previous books written about similar issues in different countries with names like Free the Animals, or there's one about Ronnie Lee called The Animals Freedom Fighter, and I always found them quite sort of too obvious or something. I don't know. I didn't like that style, and I know it's often the publishers themselves that insist on particular titles in order to sell the book, but I wanted something a bit less obvious, and the Humanity Trigger. So what it is, it's a combination of the two different nicknames that were given to Richard Martin, who we talked about earlier in episode 1 of this, who was the guy that kickstarted everything off in a sense in 1822 with passing of the Cruelty to Cattle Act. So Richard Martin's 2 nicknames were Hair Trigger Martin, and he was called that because of his propensity for dueling. And apparently he had a short temper, and at the drop of a hat or a white glove, he'd challenged some opponent to a duel. Apparently he had fought over 100 duels in his life, right? So he died an old man, so he must have been quite good at it. So there was Hair Trigger Martin, and then there was a name given to him by King George IV, who was a friend of his, personal friend of his, for his work for animals, and that was Humanity Dick. So I put together Humanity and Trigger and got the Humanity Trigger. It was either that or Dick Hair. So yeah, I think I
should have put that together actually. But to be honest, I was thinking it was something to do with animal rights violations being a trigger to you.
Yeah, it's a multi. I mean, it's vague enough, or it's obscure enough to hang a few different meanings onto it. It's quite it's got the anarcho-punk sort of vibe to it as well. I think Humanity and Trigger, they're 2 opposing words in a sense, you know. Yeah, it was just like a more interesting title, I thought, than
yeah, academics in the future will be. Yeah, Deb said it's a good play on words, which
yeah, yeah. I thought it was a bit more eye catching, I suppose, as well. You know,
yeah,
stop.
I guess so.
Yeah.
So we're on part 3. I think this is about where we left off.
That's right.
Let me
Yeah.
just get rid of that banner for a second. So we've so this is part 3, and you know, do you want to give a quick summary of what you've covered so far?
Yeah, so we're up now to about the sort of the 80s and 90s, and last episode we sort of covered the rise of the Animal Liberation Front and the Hunt Saboteurs, both in the UK initially, and then spreading over to Ireland and beyond, of course. And now we're moving into these two groups have found their feet. They've gathered a lot of numbers. I'm talking about the ALF and the Hunt Saboteurs, and during the 80s and 90s. There was a lot of significant events, both here in Ireland and in the UK. In terms of violence, it was always a lot more aggressive, I guess, over in the UK. So if we just go through a little bit of what's happening around then, on the top here we see 2 images of hired thugs that were paid to come in and beat up the saboteurs, essentially, especially down with the Surrey Union. Now, the Surrey Union were a notorious fox hunt based in Surrey, and they used to get sabbed by London groups and the Brighton saboteurs a lot, and more as well. But so they were getting sabotaged so effectively, so often, that they couldn't just depend on the police or their own terrier men to do the dirty work for them. They hired in. On the left here, we see a squad of goons that were paid to come in from the East End of London, basically, to come in and beat up saboteurs. And on the right, we see a slightly more organised form of that. That's the Countryside Watch, I think they were called. And they were set up by a New Zealander, in fact, an ex-soldier, who set
I
up...
think it's called Country Watch. I just want to also issue a content warning, because, in fact, I need to apologise for last week, because we did have a bit of a gruesome picture of a fox who had been killed. We've had a quick skip through, and there's nothing really this week that's going to cause too much trouble. So it's kind of a content warning that you don't need to worry
that's right.
that much.
That's right.
There's a bit of fisticuffs.
There's brawling. And there's what actually used to happen often was up and coming photojournalists fresh out of college would often ask to come out with their local saboteur group, because they knew that there was a good chance of them getting a very dramatic photo or two. And a few of them won prizes, I think Pulitzer prizes, for a guy called Andrew Testa, whose photographs some of these are from. So here's like another classic photograph of. So these guys are the Brixton mob. Okay, I need to explain a little bit about the Brixton mob, because they were very significant during the 80s and 90s in counteracting the extreme violence that the Hunt sabotage movement was coming up against. So on the top here again, we see more hired goons. They're a so-called security firm, and these guys would arrive down and prevent the saboteurs from gaining access to public paths, which is completely against the law. They were basically taking the law into their own hands. The police were standing by and allowing them to do this. So the response from the Hunt sabotage movement was equally dramatic, I would say. There was this group in Brixton called the Brixton Mob, who were basically anarchist squatters. There was hundreds of them all around Brixton, and at 2 or 3 in the morning on a Saturday morning, a couple of Land Rovers would do the rounds of the squats all around Brixton and pick up dozens of these guys, and they'd bring them all down often to the Surrey Union Hunt, and you could have upwards of 200 saboteurs taking on the might of the hired goons, basically, and the police and the hunters and their support.
Hey, Mark, do us a favor. Go back one.
Yeah.
You see the baton that the copper's got there in his hand.
Yeah.
So it's that one where they swivel it around and they've got a big stick, and they swivel it around and they got a small one. It was a small one that I got hit with
in your eye
at Hillgrove.
Right.
And so that was a fractured jaw and everything. Yeah. So I just remember this thing coming out and hitting me about here.
It's extremely quick, right? So it sort of comes from the side instead of straight on, and you don't see it coming. They sort of just swing them around, you know. So
they can kind of just twirl it in the hand.
That's right.
They?
That's right.
Yeah.
There's no effort. There's no sort of pre-warning or anything. So there was a continuing escalation of events, especially around the southeast of England. I must say there was a situation where if saboteurs were attacked by their local hunt on a given week, they'd invite a lot of extra sabs from around the area to come down for a regional hit, or if it was serious enough, for a national hit. If it was a national hit, you could have dozens of various sab groups arriving down on one hunt, and you could have 200, 300 saboteurs, all in black, all wearing balaclavas, piling out of all these black transit vans with the grills and the windscreens to prevent anyone from smashing the windscreens like the Brixton mob had. So it became a very heavy atmosphere at times. And Class War were probably the only political organization, if you could call them that were in any way genuinely interested in this. The left, particularly the far left, had no interest in animal rights. At this time, I would say, pretty much at all. It was groups like Class War, it was anarchist insurrectionist groups like Class War who loved the idea of brawling with the rich and their supporters and the police and saving a fox in the bargain and getting a day out into the countryside as well. So it attracted, around this time, some saboteur groups attracted a lot of harder edge in response to the continuous violence that they were facing. I mean, around this time, around the early 90s, I'm talking about the UK again, there was 2 saboteurs killed, murdered essentially, in 2 separate incidents around Cheshire and Manchester, I think. It was Mike Hill and Tom Warby. And the 2 of them were young men. I think Tom Warby was 16, and it was his first time out sabbing.
I think Mike went out with the Liverpool group, which I went out with.
Liverpool, yeah. And they were crushed to death by vehicles, you know. Police did nothing. So there had to be a response to this, and the response either was go home or escalate things up a notch and take these guys on. And it was the latter was the option chosen. So you had a lot of people who would come down, and there would be hundreds and hundreds of saboteurs, and violence at this point was almost inevitable. If you have enough people on both sides that are turning up, at some point there's going to be a punch up. So this led eventually to a group called the Hunt Retribution Squad, which was an informal, secretive offshoot of the Hunt Saboteurs, I suppose, or the Hunt Sabotage movement, who would deliberately attack hunters or their vehicles, and they were into using violence, whereas the Hunt Saboteurs Association do not use violence unless it's in self-defense. So here on the left, you see hundreds of saboteurs, or dozens, I think it was about 40 or 50 saboteurs, arriving down to the Hursley Hambledon hunt in Hampshire, who are a notoriously violent hunt. And the response that the saboteurs gave to their violence was to arrive down en masse and smash up all their vehicles and beat up anyone that got in their way and then get out of the area. And a load were arrested, I think, afterwards, but all the charges were dropped, I think, in the end. So around this time, around the mid-90s, the late 80s into the 90s, into the late 90s, really, there was a lot of violence, including over in Ireland. I was the victim, along with comrades of mine, including Bernie, who were attacked by the Galway Blazers back in 1996. So at this time, there was a battle raging in the countryside, basically. And the police were quite content to either take the side of the hunt or to stand aside. Here we see, on the left, we see the Galway Blazers being sabotaged back in 2019. So they're still being sabbed by a group there. And on the right, we see a saboteur pointing at that's a beagle pack. That's a foot pack hunting hares, I would imagine, and very easy to sabotage. And a lot of the recruits for these movements were coming from the anarcho-punk scene, which was a evolution and an offshoot of the original punk rock movement that took the idea of anarchy in the UK and anarchy everywhere else very seriously. And they were spearheaded by a group called Crass, who I think I mentioned earlier, who didn't actually mention animal rights much in their lyrics, but their whole tone was given towards that sort of idea. They're all vegetarian, and they did talk about it, but they didn't mention it the way, say, bands like Conflict did.
Well, this guy's got a Conflict T-shirt on, hasn't he? So
with the picture of the cat and the restraining device.
Yeah, they had a song called "This Is the ALF," didn't they?
This is the ALF, yeah. So you had a band like Conflict. Then here's Crass, who were described as forever on the verge of exploding when they were playing live, which I thought was an excellent description of the fury of them. Up here, you have an album called "The Ungovernable Force" by Conflict, who there's a song called "This Is the ALF," which is so explicit and so direct that I guarantee them attention from Special Branch and from the Animal Rights National Index for years afterwards. They were dogged by police brutality and provocation, and they were spying on them and all the rest of it. So Conflict really pushed pro-ALF, pro-direct action message, and this resonated amongst their audience. And it's my contention that these guys provided a lot of the, what you might call, the foot soldiers for these movements. During the 80s and 90s, there was an influx of younger, more radical actors in the animal rights scene, and they gravitated towards the direct action end of the spectrum, and really pushed the sort of a belligerent, I wouldn't say violent, but direct method of communication, and endorsing direct action and not pulling any punches, really, I suppose, if you like. And this was a step up from what had gone on previously, I think, in terms of the frequency of these direct actions.
Let me ask you a sociological question, Mark. Because there's a lot of discussion nowadays in the modern movement about the kind of political leanings of the movement. And I've always said that back in the days that you're talking about, I mean, it was certainly left-leaning, if not pretty left, in my recollection. Does that chime with you, or?
Yeah, what I would say is that the vast majority, if not probably more or less all, of the animal rights activists that I know or have ever come across are left, usually pretty far left, often anarchists. And there was a strain of green anarchist thinking in the sort of movement broadly overall, I would say, during the 80s and 90s. Having said that, a lot of people I know who identify with Marxism or as communists of the sort of the older tradition, of the more working class sort of tradition, have no time for animal rights. And the harder left they are, the more reactionary they tend to be.
Marx had a terrible attitude towards other animals. I mean, he saw other animals as resources.
To be exploited. So which is very unfortunate, because the whole Marxist project, from what I can gather, and I'm not a Marxist and I haven't read much of his stuff, but I do know enough to know that the whole idea was to liberate and to be free from oppression. But he was only concerned about human oppression and human freedom. He talked of a concept, a driving force behind his politics was an idea called species being, and that's the idea that every species has certain needs and wants and desires that, if left unexpressed, cause misery and poverty and so on. And the idea of a communist society was to be free, to be unhindered, and to do what your species is made in nature to do.
There's a famous quote, isn't there, from Marx, where he says that in the after the revolution, as it were, then you would do what you want. You might be a critic in the morning, go fishing in the afternoon and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then some people started to say, how come you Marxists don't see other animals as part of the proletariat? But they never really answered that, I don't think.
Yeah. I would say that farm animals are as much a part of the working class or working class themselves, right? And nature is the original superstructure. It's not industry, it's nature. And so it's a pity that Marx didn't take a step or two back and see a bigger picture and apply his broader ideas and premises to nature and to non-human animals as well as human animals.
Yeah, some neo-Marxists did, people like involved in the Frankfurt School and stuff. They did, Herbert Marcuse in particular.
Yeah, it's a change a bit. So obviously there's Corey Lee Wren, who wrote the wonderful Animals in Ireland, I think. Animals in Irish Society.
book,
Yeah. And she's a Marxist, a feminist, a vegan. So there is a more modern and up-to-date version of Marxism that does include contemporary concerns about the environment and about animals specifically as well. So that is changing, but it took an awful long time, I must say. And I think the original Marxists back in the day sort of missed a thing there. They really sort of could have had it so much better, I think, if they had just included non-human animals as well. But there was a very little interest in that. I think generally they would have regarded that as a sellout and at best a distraction and at worst a sellout.
Yeah, but then they did the same with feminism. They thought that as well. So
yeah. So the class struggle is the be all and end all to some of these people, and that's a very reductive and limited way of looking at it.
Yeah, it is indeed.
So moving on, there's a few slides here. They're from my own personal collection. This is the group that I hooked up with when I moved to Hertfordshire, north of London in the United Kingdom. And the group there was the Chiltern Hunt Sabs. The Chiltern is a sort of an area of forest, sort of in Hertfordshire and Bedfordshire, north of London. So we used to sab around the North London area. And this is us on the last day of the season, which is sometime in March, and various hunts stop at various times throughout March. So the Vale of Aylesbury, who were the local hunt that we used to sab, used to usually be one of the last groups, the last hunts going in the season. So as a result, say by the last Saturday in March, these guys were one of the few hunts that were still going out. So they attracted saboteurs from all over the area who had no hunts of their own to sab for the day. So we'd all descend on that given day, the very last hunt of the season. It's quite a prestigious day for them. Here we are trying out a new tactic. Sitting in front of in the back of that white van there are all the hounds, and obviously they are vital to the hunt. So they're being brought from their kennels to where the hunt's going to meet up, and we're sitting in front of the van there, blocking the van. And we stayed there, I think, then for 3 or 4 hours until the local constabulary arrived and gathered enough numbers to then force us.
So what year is that? What year is that picture there?
This would have been like late 90s, 98, 99, I would imagine.
And are you still liaising with Ireland at the stage, or have you moved back?
No, I'd lost contact with the sabotage movement back there. I was sort of fully focused on what was going on in the UK, I suppose. I mean, I was still in touch with a few of the people there, but I knew that the West of Ireland Sabs had stopped because of the massive violence that was shown to us.
Here's a question you would like to take, I think, Mark. Deb says early orders only right now.
Okay, right. So here's the book. It arrived.
Hang on, I'll put you on big screen. There you go.
Okay. So the one of the early copies is a pilot copy of the book that arrived a few days ago. So it's available now for pre-order as hard copy and as an ebook from Earth Island Books.
I'm looking forward to getting a signed version of that, Mark.
Signed version, yeah, sure, yeah.
just to let you know.
yeah, and from December the 4th, it'll be available via Waterstones, Barnes and Noble, all good bookshops, Amazon, and direct from Earth Island as well. So hard copy, ebook, available from.
Any idea of the price, Mark? Yet?
It's £15. So about 13 New Zealand dollars. I think that's 20 euro or thereabouts, maybe a bit less. 17, 18 euro, I think.
I think that's pretty good in this day and age, I think.
Yeah, it is pretty good. Yeah. And they're Earth Island are a very small but very active sort of punk rock publishing house. They sort of specialize in that end of the spectrum, and they publish music.
I know that Ronnie, you mentioned Ronnie's book before, but he had terrible trouble getting the price down for his book. I mean,
okay.
It's really, really expensive. So I think they had to buy it themselves in bulk. And then, yeah.
Oh, that sounds a bit awkward. Okay, yeah. I'm not too sure who published his book, but these guys that I'm dealing with are really good, and they're really upfront and fair and not greedy. So very happy to be working with them. So it'll be out soon, and all these photographs and more that you see in the slides are in the book. So here, it's me there with my little face mask and a black hoodie up, standing in front of the hounds van. Again, just sort of stalling them up and just using a different tactic. A note on police response to all this and contrasting it with the police response now that there's a ban in the UK. And Roger will confirm this, I'm sure. And it was the same in Ireland. They couldn't throw enough resources. The police couldn't throw enough resources into trying to control the hunt sabotage movement. They drafted in new laws. They broke those laws. They were happy to pay out millions in compensation. They would repeatedly break laws. They'd attack saboteurs, beat people up, false imprisonments, wrongful arrests. They'd have helicopters, riot vans. They'd be riding with the hounds. They could have dozens of guys out on foot. They could have the riot police. All of that against us. And even still, it didn't work. And the hunt still felt the need to bring in their own private security, like I was talking about earlier. And even then, it didn't work. So, despite all this, despite the police attention, the hunt sabotage movement continued to thrive and grow and be more and more effective, I think. And you contrast that with the police response to a ban in now. They're nowhere to be seen at a hunt. They have no interest in enforcing the new law.
Well, they said straight away that they just wasn't able to enforce it, didn't they?
They didn't have the resources, they said, but they had loads of resources. Up to the week of the ban, they had all the resources that they wanted to try and control us. And when the ban comes in, they have no resources to try and control the rich and doing what they're doing. So it's actually left now to the hunt sabotage movement to become hunt monitors and essentially try and enforce the law that the police should be doing themselves and doing the work for the police, essentially, and bringing prosecutions with the RSPCA and protect our wildlife and groups like that. So the hunt sabotage movement, in a sense, has morphed into, in the UK and so on, has morphed into a monitoring group as much as a sabotage movement. And when hunts go out pretending to drag hunt or whatever, as soon as they see sabs, often they go home because they know that their fun is spoiled. So things have changed over in the UK since the ban. I wouldn't say it's the end of hunting, but it's the beginning of the end of hunting, I would say. This is us again. This is back in 98, 99 to emphasize drag hunting. Pardon?
So some of them are still pretty blatant about it. I was going to ask you actually, because Ronnie and I did a program about this recently, about the it's just been announced that Scotland have banned hunting, which obviously they banned hunting at the same time as it's supposed to have been banned in the first place. And so it looks like they've brought in new laws now to kind of like fill the loopholes in the first legislation.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. The law states, the ban states that it's illegal to hunt quarry with dogs, but it doesn't mention any other animal. So there was a hunt in the Midlands somewhere during 2010s, 2011s in Warwickshire maybe, that had a trained owl. They trained an owl to spot for foxes. So they had a local who would have an owl on a leash that was hovering above a guy who was leading the pack of riders, and the owl was looking out for foxes. And if the owl came across a fox, it would hoot, and then the fox would run, and then the chase was on. I don't know if you heard about this. And the local
I think that the use of birds of prey became quite common.
Yeah, but owls though.
Oh no, never heard that before. No.
Right. And the local SAB group had a guy who owned a gyrocopter, and they would go out in the gyrocopter and follow the hunt around and try and film any transgressions of the law, right? And the local hardmen in that hunt said that they were really annoyed at this guy that was coming out week after week and buzzing around them in his gyrocopter and filming their every move and all that. So they wanted to get at him. So one day, as the hunt were out and the gyrocopter was up and it was running low on fuel, and it needed to land at a nearby airfield to fuel up, and a van load of local thug heavies drove out to they saw the gyrocopter sort of landing in the distance, and they knew that it was going to land in Long Marsden sort of airfield, some sort of remote strip out in the Midlands somewhere. And the gyrocopter landed, and the van load of thugs sort of pulled up, and a guy hopped out called Trevor Morse, and he was a big, thick, pink, sort of big, heavy sort of set man, and he stood in front of the gyrocopter, blocking its path as it tried to run along the runway to take off. And anytime that the guy in the gyrocopter tried to skirt past this guy, he'd stand in front of the gyrocopter again. And eventually, the back blade of the gyrocopter sliced this Trevor Morse guy's head right in two, dead instantly. It was all caught on video camera. Apparently, I haven't seen this, but apparently it was. And
Yeah, I remember the court case, because I think
yeah.
the because we used to call microlights. You're talking about now,
No, it was a gyrocopter. It was like a tiny little helicopter, like a 2-person helicopter.
Oh, with the old twirligig at the top.
blades
Oh,
and sort
yeah,
of
okay.
like a black back blade as well that went sort of the other way, you know. And
Yeah.
it was the back blade
Speaking
that
of
sort of just
technology, Deb's asking, have the Sabs used drones?
drones are the big thing now. Yes, they are the big thing to monitor hunts. They are a cheap, effective way. I think basically they've superseded the use of things like a gyrocopter, which is a very expensive way of going about that. So drones are the way to do this now. And a lot of Sab groups are monitoring hunts with drones and using the drones to gather footage as evidence. So yes, yeah, it's the new bit of equipment. It's the modern form of the gizmo, I think, you know.
Yeah, I used to drive my group absolutely bonkers. I used to say that we needed to get a microlight because in Essex, for example, there was 5 hunts, so you could kind of almost like sab 5 at once.
Yeah.
But also, when I went back to Liverpool, that was where the Grand National was. It was also where the hare coursing was.
Oh yeah,
yeah. And so I was saying, if we have a gyrocopter or a microlight, that would be great. It
would speed
never
things up.
happened, but
very expensive, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
It's beyond the budget of the average Sab group, I would imagine. Whereas like a drone, you can buy a drone, a really good one, for a couple of £100, I think, you know.
Yeah, Jennifer's asking.
He got his head sliced into.
Yeah, he was actually killed, wasn't he? So
he was killed straight away. He didn't even see it coming. The driver of the gyrocopter was initially charged with murder. That was dropped to manslaughter, and eventually he was found not guilty. And the guy that was killed, this Trevor Morse chap, was deemed to be responsible for his own death, essentially. But yeah, so around this time, so there was 1 hunter and 2 hunt saboteurs killed in the field, I suppose, like in the history of the hunt sabotage movement, as well as thousands being hospitalized and arrested and so on. Almost all on the hunt sabotage side. It's interesting when people talk about animal rights and violence. The connection between animal rights and violence is generally that if you're an animal rights activist, particularly a hunt saboteur, you're very likely to be a victim of violence, not an aggressor. So there's plenty of violence in the animal rights movement, but it comes from the opposition almost entirely, and the response from us is self-defense. It's very rare that hunt saboteurs or any other wing of the direct action movement or anywhere else in the animal rights movement is violent like that. It's usually a thing of self-defense. So here we have us. This is a pre-ban. We're demonstrating in favor of drag hunting, which is when they drag a scent of a fox around a given area, and the hounds then try and follow and chase the scent, rather than an animal. So this is us. We cross-dressed. We had banners saying "Hunting makes us cross," and in brackets "dress," and time to turn to drag, ducky, and pantyhose, not tallyhose, and all that. And we marched into the field where the hunt were meeting. And
you wouldn't get away with that nowadays, I'm afraid, Mark.
Probably wouldn't. More innocent those days, and it made the ITN news, and we continued sabbing in our various outfits, wigs. This is Alan; he's a skinhead. Usually, he's got a wig on, and yeah, it was a very funny sort of day. Out of again, it was the very last day of the season. It was the very last hunt of the season, so a bit sort of anything goes. Then where you try out new tactics and stuff like this. We were astounded by the level of state infiltration of the movement. This woman up top here, her spy name is Christine Green, and no one knows her real name. And she used to spy on us, the Chiltern Hunt Sabs, and I think the Reading Sabs and the West London group. This is actually her helping us sabotage a hunt. The guy here, just looking back at her, is a genuine Sab. He's a friend of mine called Rob, and yeah, so these spies were sent in, acting as let's go back to that again, acting as any other saboteur. They were obvious for their driving skills. They all had police special driving training, so they were really good at driving. A lot of them were quite aggressive and quite hostile against the hunt. And if it kicked off, some of them were straight in there, and they were punching and being punched the same as everyone else, you know. So they got really stuck in. But they were, for a group whose only aim really was to save foxes from being torn apart by dogs, the state seemed highly aroused by the activities of the hunt saboteur movement. Obviously, they were infiltrating the ALF as well, and that's a bit more understandable from the state's point of view. But they were really interested in controlling or trying to dissemble, I suppose, the hunt sabotage movement. I can only assume it's because the hunt have friends in high places, and they were putting pressure on the police, generally police forces around the area.
Yeah, it sounds about right.
Crack down on the saboteurs. So and this the police did. The infiltration though was bizarre. I mean, with this woman Christine Green, she infiltrated the West London Sabs for about 4 years. She was gone out with a well-known saboteur there at the time, and then she disappeared at the end of her deployment. The way they do, they leave a letter on the breakfast table of their lover or their friend's house, or whatever, saying I have to go to Australia, I'm burnt out, or something like this, and then they just disappear. But in her case, after she disappeared for a few months, she got back in touch with her boyfriend who was in the West London Sabs, and they reignited their relationship, and she returned to the UK, and the police went public on her, saying that she was a police spy. And then she wrote a public letter to the Guardian about how she had made these wonderful friends in the animal rights movement, and best friends she could ever have. And I think she felt a bit betrayed by the police. But she had taken part in one of the biggest ALF raids in 1999, I think, when she took part in a raid on a fur farm somewhere, and 6,000 mink were freed. So these people were getting very, very involved in the actions of the groups that they were spying on, to the point where it was all very, very unethical and going into very grey areas. And I mean, we all know how that turned out. But apparently now, Christine Green, that isn't her real name, but her spy name, is still living up in Scotland somewhere with her ex-hunt saboteur boyfriend, and they're keeping a low profile. And I think a few people in the movement are aware of where they actually live, but otherwise, she went native essentially and dropped out.
Yeah, it's a tangled web, isn't it? Because I mean, there were some Sabs who went over to the hunt, and vice versa, wasn't there? So yeah,
there was a guy in the Chiltern Hunt Sabs, I forget his name, who I knew him from very early on, and he ended up with the Vale of Aylesbury Hunt. He ended up going out riding with them instead of sabbing them. So there was weird, right? But I mean, I guess in anything like this, at the very extremities, there's going to be this sort of behavior.
Yeah, there was a guy in Liverpool, and I've never been able to work him out. He seemed to be some kind of double agent, and it was a little bit like you were saying about when they were kind of, as it were, on our side. They were quite violent towards the hunt.
Yeah,
it was just the way that they were, kind of thing.
Yeah,
and I do remember one time this guy kind of saved me from a big crowd of hunters. He came charging into this field, with a big kind of branch or something, and cleared them all out of the way. And
right.
but then I think he was riding with them as well, and so it seemed to be we could never work him out.
I mean, so if they're in a situation where they really they're beyond the law, right? They know that if they get stuck in at a protest or a hunt sab and start throwing punches and all that, they aren't going to get into trouble for this. So even if they're arrested by local police who are unaware that they're spies, within 10 minutes there'll be a phone call made to their handler and they'll be out again. So they're acting with complete impunity. They're supermen. They can go in and they can do anything in the name of their job and get away with it. So for every other hunt saboteur who's a genuine saboteur, they're afraid of breaking the law. They might get caught. There's consequences. For them, there was no consequences to their actions. They were more likely to get promotion than a fine or imprisonment. So they had nothing to lose. So I'm surprised.
There's a couple of comments to respond to. Ben saying that
shot down the drone.
Drones. One of the drones was shot down, and then Deb was saying the Sabs infiltrated the hunters. I don't know about that. You might do, Mark. I do know that some Sabs join the hunt as
Yeah,
if they were supporters in order to get the
that's
meat
right.
card.
That's right. Well, there was a guy called Mike Huskisson as well, who was active, particularly in the 70s and 80s, who infiltrated the British Field Sports Society, as it was known then, and went out on hundreds of different mink, otter, fox hunts, all sorts, and had a camera, had a sort of hidden camera. And he's written 2 books. One's called Outfoxed, and the other book's called Outfoxed Again. And they detail his time as an undercover hunt supporter. Not an active hunter, but a hunt supporter. So he would follow the hunt around in his tweed, looking a bit like Jeremy Clarkson with his flat cap on and his little BFSS pin badges, and looking the part. And he was doing this for years, and he was using a sort of a hidden camera and capturing all this footage that sort of
and that wasn't easy in those days because cameras were like big boxes.
I know, yeah. So it must have been very dangerous work. It's not like these days we can get pinhole cameras in a shop on the high street. It would have been much less subtle than that. So I mean, if he was caught doing that by the support in the field at the time, they would have kicked him to death. So very brave man. So I'm not sure if it happened that often, but Mike Huskinson was deep undercover for years and produced these 2 books and loads of reports. And I think he used to work in tandem with the League Against Cruel Sports and pass on the information to them to use in prosecutions and public information and all this sort of stuff. So it didn't happen nearly as much as the police infiltrating the saboteurs, I'll tell you that. But yeah, it did happen a little bit. This is our group enjoying a beer in the pub after a hard day's sabbing. And that's the end of the slides. Cheers and get off my fucking land. And we could take some questions and answers. We could do a questions and answers thing now, or something like that. But that's the end of my pictures. And as I say, all this story and all these images are in the book, which will be out in a few weeks' time.
Wow. So it's been quite a story, really. It goes all the way back to kind of like animal welfare through to the big focus on Ireland was last week, I suppose. And then you've still got a few connections this time.
Yeah.
Why did you call the title "The History in Ireland"? Because it's wider than that, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it sort of meanders. I suppose the book's in 2 halves, really. There's one half is a more academic look at all the publicly available information about the Irish scene, and then the other half really is an autobiographical account of my story in Ireland and in the 16 years I spent in the UK. I think I included it because it's part of the Irish story. The evolution of the movement in Ireland wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for the movement in England, really. And I think it sort of added sort of context. Yeah, it does meander a little bit. So the title is slightly misleading. It isn't just about the Irish history. It does include the my part of my involvement in the UK scene as well, and a bit of the broader history there to give context. But I guess it's just part of a wonderful story, really. So I didn't want to leave it out.
No, indeed. I mean, I'm not complaining. I'm just asking. Was the main thing about it. Right, we've got no new comments coming in.
Okay.
So it's been quite a blast. Now, as I said before we came on, I do these kind of archive things now. So I'll probably put the 3 together, so people can watch it all the way through. We've got one from Joanne. What is your handle on the socials, and which platforms are you on?
Okay, so I've got a website called thehumanitytrigger.com, which is a poorer written version of the book, basically, but it contains some more photographs that I couldn't include in the book because of copyright reasons. So it's where the book came out of, and that's thehumanitytrigger.com. I run a Facebook page in Oakland as well called Vegan Living Oakland, which is the vegan outreach stuff that I do in Oakland, sort of thing. But it's less, it's more of a local thing but yeah, those 2 places.
Yeah, humanitytrigger.com.
Yeah.
I think you might have sent me that link.
I've got it here. Yeah. Show. There we go.
Yeah. And also, Deb is saying, I think you've kind of really touched on this already in a sense. Do you think any of the police infiltrators were also provocateurs?
Undoubtedly. I mean, you
Yeah.
look at Mark Stone alone. Absolutely, and they always have been, and it's part of their job, even if they don't admit it. Their public face is that they don't have sex with activists, and they don't break the law, and they don't provoke. They do all these things by the bucketful, but officially they're just there to sort of stand in the background and gather information. But no, they fully embed, and the only way that they can embed convincingly is by getting stuck in. And
Yeah,
Mark Stone,
they take that a bit seriously, don't they? Embed bit.
yeah, absolutely embed at the enemy. I mean, my God, the stuff that they were doing really,
Yeah, I mean,
unbelievable.
we joke about it, but we shouldn't really. But if people want to really check up on that, we mentioned this before. You can go to Spy Cops on online, and that's got a kind of history of all the different groups, London Greenpeace, etc., and everything. In terms of provocateurs, I was once told by somebody who reckoned they were in the know that if the state, as it were, can't hold a movement back, they'll often push it forward.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's got two kind of ramifications. A, it kind of pushes the radicals away from the mainstream of the movement to create a division there, but also it pushes them into actions which the police then have got the powers to really do something about.
Yeah.
So
right.
that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Really.
That's right. Over in the United States, it's been a big problem there. That very thing with infiltration, but it was here as well. And Mark Stone was active over in Ireland too. His ex-wife is Irish, from Cork actually, so he used to spend a lot of time in Cork, spying in various groups and visiting his wife and family there.
Yeah, I know you mentioned the Galway Blazers a couple of times, but they had, you were saying that some of the English hunts had a more violent reputation. I think from us over there, the Irish hunts seem to have a really bad reputation too.
Yeah, I mean the most violence I've seen has probably been it's a toss up really between the southeast of England and the west of Ireland, really, in terms of the violence. There was a lot of violence in, as I was mentioning earlier, with the Brixton mob and the sort of black bloc tactics and all that. The impression that the British activists had was Ireland was the real hard edge, and the movement was so small and new there, and the establishment were really keen to squash it before it grew, and the violence was I think it was probably worse over in Ireland in terms of us being the victims, and over in the UK it was more even-sided actually. I think.
Well, I'll tell you my own perspective on it was the fact that I used to do the press for the HSA when we did the Waterloo Cup. The Waterloo Cup was the biggest hair coursing event in the world at the time, and we used to have this little cottage in a place called Dungeon Lane, and we used to get calls from all over the world and everything. And but we did that, and a lot of the courses were Irish who'd come over for the day. They get kind of pissed and smash up the local pubs and everything. And as you said last week, I think, Mark, of all the hunters, the coursers were really, really violent, weren't they?
Coursers have the worst reputation. Coursers and terrier men at fox hunts were the two most violent demographics of people I think I've ever come across. So I'm not sure what it is. I think even coursers amongst the hunting world are sort of frowned upon, even.
I think so. I think
there is a hierarchy.
The riffraff, aren't there?
The real scum of the earth are the sort of coursers. But if you're really posh and of money, then you're a fox hunter, and that's the sort of acceptable face of it.
I'll tell you how things changed really with the press, for example. When I used to do the Waterloo Cup, there was a lot of interest all over the world. As I said, the phone was going all day and everything. And like 3 years later, nothing. And you'd be having to ring them, and you'd ring up the Liverpool Echo or something and go, we're doing the hunts, we're doing the Waterloo Cup and everything, and they'd go, has anybody been arrested? And you'd say no, and he said, has anybody been injured? And you'd say no. And they well give us a ring when they have.
When that happens,
that's how it changed. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. If it bleeds, it leads. That's the media. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah, if it bleeds, it leads. Yeah, that's That's the tagline, all right. Right. Okay. So I think we can possibly end our epic time together, Mark. It's been a real pleasure. It's been absolutely great.
Thank you very much for having me on. It's been great fun talking about this.
Yeah. Well, obviously, it's brought back quite a few memories
I'm sure.
for me, of course, and yeah. So it's been quite a gas, really. So so thanks for writing your book, and thanks
You're
for putting
welcome.
together your prize, your thing. So we'll see you when you got your second book out, shall we?
Okay, yeah. Part 4. Yeah, excellent. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, everyone, and we'll see you again.